So, the main act. I have to say, I was slightly confused as to why they needed gunpowder when we've proved that we've had 3 governments in the last 4 meetings, without any gunpowder as far as I'm aware. But, no, they aren't what they used to be. Times have changed anyway. But Mary, welcome back. And we look forward to a topical talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening to you all, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure that practically everybody in this room remembers, just as I do, those wonderful back garden bonfires and firework parties of the 5th of November when we were children. The thrilling whoosh of the skyrockets and the whiz of the Catherine wheels and the crack of the jumping jacks, and the wonder of writing your name in lights with a sparkler, and the smell of smoke in the air, and finding rocket sticks in the streets the next morning. Well, we live nowadays in rather more health and safety conscious times, and although fireworks are hugely popular for other festivals as well as bonfire night, the back garden bonfires are nowhere near so common as they used to be, and no more do children make a guy and trail it around the streets begging permission to buy their fireworks. Now, you all know that Guy Fawkes tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament, but you might not know that until 1859, it was actually a legal requirement to celebrate his failure to do so. And you might not know the why and the how all this came about, nor how the plot had its roots in the Midlands, and that the final shootout with the fleeing conspirators took place not far from Dudley. Again, you all know how Henry VIII split from the Church of Rome over his determination to marry Anne Boleyn. And after this split, the reformed practices of Protestantism took firm hold in Britain. It's very hard for us today to realise how deeply this difference in religious practices divided society. But it was rooted in the absolute belief that only by following the practices of the right church was your soul guaranteed to pass into the presence of God and not be hurled into the everlasting fires of hell. In the reign of Elizabeth I, anyone who failed to attend services at their parish church was heavily fined. And then things became very much more difficult for Catholics when in 1570, Pope Pius V declared Queen Elizabeth to be a heretic, calling upon Catholics to remove her from the throne and absolving them from sin if they took her life. Now, in Protestant eyes, Catholicism meant allegiance not to England, but to foreign powers, especially Spain, and all the attendant horrors of the Spanish Inquisition. In 1580, led by Father Edmund Campion, 3 Jesuit priests began a secret mission to England. They came not to spread sedition, but to support and encourage Catholics in their faith. Now, these were men of the highest conviction and courage. As when they were discovered, they were treated as enemies of the state, they were tortured, and they were executed. The secret service system was created in England to gather intelligence about Catholic conspiracies. And that's what culminated in the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots in 1587. In the closing years of Queen Elizabeth's reign, Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex, a handsome young man, entwined himself around her heart with sweet words and honeyed phrases. But when he flagrantly disobeyed her express orders as to his conduct of warfare in Ireland, Elizabeth banished him from the court. In bitter rage with the Queen and her councillors, Essex foolishly raised a rebellion, which ended in the inevitable severing of that handsome head from his body on Tower Green. Now, amongst the young men who joined the Earl's rebellion were some who hoped by doing so to win freedom for Catholic worship. One such was Robert Catesby, and amongst his comrades were Jack Wright, together with Catesby's cousin, Francis Tresham, and a distant relation by marriage of Catesby's named John Grant. Now, another of their associates was Lord Monteagle. Now, remember their names, for we will meet all of them again later. By far the likeliest successor to the aging Queen Elizabeth was King James VI of Scotland, son of the Catholic Mary Queen of Scots, but raised as a Protestant. He seemed to lend a sympathetic ear to requests that after he became king, he would ease the anti-Catholic laws. According to one such petitioner for this easing, this petitioner was Thomas Percy, who was a distant relative of the Earl of Northumberland, and he was another of Catesby's comrades from the Essex Rebellion. Remember his name as well. King James came to the English throne in 1603, and early the following year made it very clear that he had no intention of easing the Catholic situation, and he banished all Jesuits and seminary priests from the country on pain of death. Now, those who had believed his earlier statements were naturally furious at what they saw as a direct betrayal, and they became increasingly impatient with the urgings of their priests for calm, forbearance. And amongst such, brooding on all this, his family's riverside house at Lambeth, was Robert Catesby. His father, Sir William Catesby, was a member of an ancient family who owned large estates in Warwickshire and Northamptonshire, where Catholicism was still firmly rooted. Now, tradition has it that Robert Catesby was born in 1573, family property in Warwickshire, in the parish of Lapworth. It's just some 11 miles north of Stratford-upon-Avon. What is certain is that Robert Catesby grew up in an ardently Catholic family whose members frequently endured severe penalties for their faith. In 1566, Sir William Catesby had married Anne Throckmorton, daughter of Sir Robert Throckmorton of Coton Court, another leading Catholic. Her sister Muriel Throckmorton was married to Sir Thomas Tresham, and their sister Mary Throckmorton was married to Edward Arden of Park Hall, not far from Coleshill in Warwickshire. Sir William Catesby had supported that Jesuit mission of 1580 and he'd been fined large sums and suffered a lengthy imprisonment at Wisbeach Castle. An alleged Catholic plot against Elizabeth saw Bushwood Hall raided, amongst other Warwickshire properties, in 1582. Catesby's aunt, Mary, and his cousin Margaret Arden, they were thrown into the Tower of London. And his uncle, Edward Arden, suffered the hideous execution reserved for convicted traitors of being hanged, drawn, and quartered. You can imagine the impression that this dreadful business would have left on a devout 11-year-old boy. However, 10 years after that, Catesby married a Protestant bride, Catherine, the daughter of Sir Thomas Lee of Stoneleigh in Warwickshire. And the couple set up their home at Chastleton, a fine estate in Oxfordshire, which Catesby had inherited from his Throckmorton grandmother. They had 2 sons, of whom the elder died, but the younger, another Robert, was baptised there at Chastleton in 1585. Catesby would certainly have been aware that his distant cousin, Anne Vaux, rented Baddesley Clinton, a moated house not far from Lapworth, secluded in the Forest of Arden. There, Anne Vaux arranged for hiding places to be contrived so that priests were able to evade capture when the house was searched by the government poursuivants seeking to arrest them. And a visitor to Anne Vaux there in 1591 was Father Henry Garnet, the head of the Jesuits in England. Known to all his friends as Robin, Robert Catesby was 6 foot tall, handsome, well-educated. He's renowned for his horsemanship, and his generous hand and affable manners had brought him a wide circle of friends, both Catholic and Protestant. Then tragedy struck. His wife, Catherine, died in April 1598 at Ashby St Ledgers, where Sir William and Lady Catesby had their principal home. And Sir William Catesby died there the following November. And it seems that it was after this double bereavement that Catesby's deep Catholic devotion began to take a darker turn. After the Essex Rebellion in 1601, he was imprisoned. A huge fine was levied on him. And it was only paid for by the sale of his Chastleton estate and help from his wealthy uncle, Sir Thomas Tresham. And now came this perceived betrayal by King James of Catholic hopes for relief. Angry, frustrated and bitter, Catesby was already thinking of some form of plot when his friend, Thomas Percy, of very similar mind, paid him a visit. Percy was talking of assassinating the king himself, but Catesby urged him to restrain, as he and their old comrade Jack Wright were already thinking of something much more far-reaching that would bring Catholics to power and return England to the old religion as well. Now, the 3 of them couldn't carry it through by themselves. So early in 1604, Catesby urged his cousins, Robert and Thomas Winter, from Huddington Court near Worcester, to come to him in London. Robert Winter was a family man and he held back, but his bachelor brother Tom Winter, who was a great friend of Catesby's, came willingly. I was very interested when I started to discover exactly how closely related so many of the plotters were. So I did a bit of family history research and created this tree to show these are the plotters, their names in red. These are the majority of the plotters anyway, and how they are all related. This is Anne Vaux, one who sheltered the priest at Baddesley Clinton. Now, Tom Winter was both a scholar and a professional soldier. He spoke several languages. In 1602, he had been on a secret mission seeking Spain's assistance if the English Catholics could be stirred to rebellion. There in Spain, he'd met both Jack Wright's brother, Christopher Wright, who's always known as Kit Wright, and also another professional soldier who'd been at school in York with the Wright brothers. This man had been in Spain so long that he is now calling himself Guido, but history knows him better as Guy Fawkes. They obtained vague promises of both financial and military aid if there were to be a rising of the Catholics in England. But shortly afterwards, Queen Elizabeth died and the Spanish king preferred to settle a peace treaty with the new king, King James. So all this had come to nothing. And it was exactly these kind of plots with Catholic foreign powers and efforts to mount an invasion. That was exactly what the English security system was created to counter, and why all Catholics were tainted, however unreasonably, with suspicion. Sir Francis Walsingham and Sir William Cecil had engineered it in Queen Elizabeth's reign, and now Sir William Cecil's son, Robert Cecil, was Secretary of State and had taken over and expanded the intelligence network. Robert Cecil was exceptionally shrewd and wily, and by this time he'd already dealt with 2 amateurish plots to remove King James. When Tom Winter heard what Catesby and Jack Wright were contemplating, he was very wary of their chances of success, saying that failure would do incalculable damage to Catholics generally. But Catesby's response, born of his blinding zealotry, was that, and I quote his words, "The nature of the disease required so sharp a remedy." And Tom Winter threw in his lot with the others. All of these men were well known in London, and now they needed to recruit someone experienced with both mining and explosives, and who could go about London unrecognised. Guy Fawkes, as well as being a convert to Catholicism, met all the criteria, and he was a willing recruit to the company that Robert Catesby's charisma welded together. And Thomas Percy joined them early in May of 1604. Upon his entering where they had gathered, he demanded angrily, and I quote, "Shall we always, gentlemen, talk and never do anything?" So later, they met again in a room at the Duck and Drake public house. There, the 5 of them, Robert Catesby, Jack Wright, Tom Winter, Thomas Percy, and Guy Fawkes, took a most solemn and binding oath of secrecy, sealed its solemnity by taking Holy Communion. Then, for the first time, the full details of the plot were given out. The country's entire political, financial and legal centre was at Westminster, where the King's residence, which was then Whitehall Palace, stood adjacent to the Law Courts, the Exchequer and the Royal Treasury. When the next session of Parliament opened, present at the House of Lords would be the royal family, the bishops, the judges and the landowning lords. Thomas Percy was often about Westminster on business for his noble relation, the Earl of Northumberland, and he was going to rent suitable premises there. They would dig a tunnel underneath it, pack the tunnel with gunpowder, which was apparently easily obtainable. Guy Fawkes would light a slow fuse, giving himself 15 minutes to flee to a ship ready and waiting to get him to the continent. There he would raise help from sympathisers for the intended new Catholic regime. The explosion would remove the whole of the top layer of society in one fell swoop, as William Shakespeare phrased afterwards, his play Macbeth, which he wrote shortly after these events. And they would also mobilise a Catholic uprising across the country. And to consolidate Catholic hold on power, they would kidnap one of King James's children, and when the carnage was over, they would produce this surviving child as the rightful heir and make sure that that child was then raised as a Catholic. Job done. So they thought. Now, adjacent to the House of Lords at Windsor was a house leased by Henry Ferrers, the owner of Baddesley Clinton. Thomas Percy obtained a sublease on this property, and the plotters began to dig underneath it, laying in stores of boiled eggs and pies, so there was no coming and going to get food. And Jack Wright's brother Kit now joined them. They hit solid stone foundations, and they'd not realised that being so close to the Thames, their hole would constantly fill with water and be useless for storing gunpowder. Things were not going well. In January 1605, Catesby persuaded Tom Winter's brother Robert Winter and also John Grant, who was eager for revenge. John Grant had suffered several raids on his manor at Norbrook near Warwick by the government agents pursuing Catholic priests. But Robert Winter was sure they'd no chance unless they could get support from either a powerful nobleman or a continental ruler. That argument cut no ice with Catesby, who snapped back that he knew none such whom he dared trust. Suddenly, fate seemed to swing in their favour. Above where they'd been struggling to dig was an empty space which had once been a kitchen of the old Palace of Westminster, and above that was their target, the chamber of the House of Lords. This vault was now being emptied of the coal a merchant had been staring there. And Thomas Percy obtained a lease on the upstairs premises. Robert Keyes, a Catholic convert, was recruited, and he supervised the moving stealthily by night of the barrels of gunpowder from Catesby's Lambeth house across the river, then to be hidden in the vault beneath stacks filed. State opening of Parliament had been delayed from February to the 3rd of October, probably due to the prevalence of plague in London. So the plotters quietly left the gunpowder where it was and returned to their Midland homes.